Wait. Stop everything. Because what people are whispering about right now is not just another celebrity rumor. This is the kind of story that makes social media freeze mid-scroll. Just when the public thought the Sean Combs saga could not sink any deeper, a new allegation exploded behind the scenes, and this one feels personal, dangerous, and terrifying. According to industry chatter, 50 Cent stepped in to shield Lil Meech after learning about an alleged plan that was not about business, not about music, but about revenge. A plot that reportedly traced back to the death of a man closely tied to Diddy's childhood, Anthony "Wolf" Jones. And suddenly, people were asking the same chilling question everywhere: why would Lil Meech be dragged into something that happened long before him? Online, the reaction was instant and explosive. Fans flooded comment sections asking how a son could be targeted for the past of his father. Others claimed this was proof that the industry never forgets and never forgives. The betrayal angle hit hard. Lil Meech had nothing to do with old street politics, yet somehow his name was allegedly placed on a list that should never exist. That is when the narrative shifted from gossip to survival. And right in the middle of that storm stood 50 Cent, a man known for turning beef into strategy, reportedly moving quietly to make sure Lil Meech stayed alive and untouched. But the tension did not start there. This entire situation detonated when 50 Cent dropped a bombshell project that sent shockwaves through entertainment culture. A multi-part exposé focused entirely on Sean Combs, peeling back layers that many believed were sealed forever. Allegations poured out like an open wound: abuse, intimidation, exploitation, and long-whispered secrets that had never been spoken this loudly before. Viewers claimed the documentary felt less like entertainment and more like a warning. Social media timelines turned into digital courtrooms, with people dissecting every frame, every claim, every pause. Then came the part that made everyone gasp. Alleged connections. Names that should never be spoken together were suddenly mentioned in the same breath. Tupac. Biggie. Two legends whose deaths shaped an entire generation. The internet did what it always does when fire meets gasoline. Clips circulated. Threads exploded. People argued, denied, defended, and accused. Some called it reckless. Others called it overdue. But one thing was clear: Diddy was not going to stay silent. The response arrived swiftly through his representative, who dismissed the entire project as a malicious attack, accusing the platform behind it of pushing unauthorized material and chasing shock value over truth. The statement painted the documentary as a desperate attempt to exploit controversy and fuel a media frenzy, claiming it distorted reality to keep audiences hooked. But instead of calming the storm, the statement only made the public lean in closer. Because when powerful people deny loudly, audiences listen harder. Now the internet is watching everything. Every move. Every silence. Every subtle shift. And the biggest question still hangs in the air like a loaded weapon: if these allegations are false, why does it feel like so many people are afraid to speak? And if even a fraction of this is true, how deep does this rabbit hole actually go? This story is no longer just about music, fame, or old rivalries. It is about power, fear, loyalty, and the unspoken rules of an industry that protects its kings until it no longer can. And as the lines between past sins and present consequences blur, one thing is certain: this scandal is far from over. If Netflix truly cared about truth, or even basic legal boundaries, this story would have ended very differently. Instead, private footage was allegedly dragged into the spotlight, ripped from its original context, including moments that were never meant to leave closed rooms. Conversations with lawyers. Confidential discussions. Material that, according to public statements, was never approved for release and never legally transferred. But here is the brutal reality of the internet age: no one was listening to the legal complaints. No one was defending dignity. The public had already made up its mind, and sympathy for Diddy and his legal team was nowhere to be found. In fact, the documentary did something far more dangerous than Netflix likely intended. It cracked open a door that had been sealed shut for years. Because once people started and viewers began digging, they realized the documentary barely scratched the surface. Names started resurfacing. Stories began circulating quietly at first, then louder. And one of those names hit especially hard: Lil Meech. Yes, that Lil Meech. The same Lil Meech audiences recognized from 50 Cent's hit series BMF. The same Lil Meech who many believed had nothing to do with old grudges or violent histories. To understand why his name suddenly re-entered the conversation, you have to rewind decades. Back to the 1990s. Back when Lil Meech's father, Big Meech, and Diddy were reportedly far more than industry acquaintances. They moved in the same circles. Shared access. Shared protection. At one point, their connection was described as close. But that bond did not fade quietly. It ended in a way that would haunt everyone involved. According to long-standing reports, everything collapsed after the death of Diddy's childhood friend and trusted bodyguard, Anthony Wolf Jones. A loss that cut deep. A loss that reshaped alliances. A loss that many believe Diddy never truly recovered from. And since Big Meech was untouchable after the dust settled, rumors began to circulate that resentment did not disappear. It simply shifted. From father to son. Back in the early 2000s, Diddy reportedly relied on members of BMF for security while moving through the South. That relationship is how Big Meech and Diddy became so closely linked in the first place. And through that proximity, Wolf Jones also became part of the inner circle. He was not just a bodyguard. He was family. He was always around. Always watching. Then came November 2003. A night that spiraled out of control inside an Atlanta nightclub known as Club Chaos. What started as tension quickly turned explosive. Wolf Jones reportedly spotted his ex-girlfriend with Big Meech inside the club, and emotions boiled over instantly. Words turned hostile. Voices rose. Threats were exchanged. Wolf was with his friend Riz, and the situation escalated so violently that both men were removed from the venue. But the night did not end there. Outside, in the parking lot, the confrontation reignited. Anger had not cooled. Weapons were reportedly drawn. And in a matter of moments, chaos became irreversible. Gunfire erupted. Wolf Jones and Riz were struck multiple times and died at the scene. Big Meech was also shot, but survived his injuries. 2 lives were lost. 1 man lived. And nothing was ever the same again. The aftermath was devastating. Any remaining connection between Diddy and Big Meech was obliterated. A childhood friend had been killed. That kind of wound does not heal. Big Meech was arrested and charged, accused of involvement in 2 murders. Investigators focused on his group, since the conflict originated there. But the case unraveled. Witnesses refused to testify. Evidence fell short. And eventually, the charges were dropped. The case went cold. Officially unsolved. Unofficially, however, people never stopped talking. Years passed. Careers rose. Fame expanded. But the past stayed buried just beneath the surface. And now, with documentaries resurfacing old wounds and social media amplifying every whisper, the question refuses to disappear. If Big Meech could not be touched, did the anger ever truly fade? Or did it simply wait for another target? Because in the world of power, memory is long. And revenge, some say, does not always come directly. And let us be clear about one thing, because this is where the story turns dark. Just because time passed does not mean the anger disappeared. People close to the situation have always said that the loss of a childhood friend is not something you simply forgive, especially when justice never comes. And unfortunately for Lil Meech, that unresolved rage allegedly needed a new direction. If Sean Combs could not make Big Meech pay for what happened years ago, then rumors claim the focus quietly shifted to his son. What exactly was attempted behind the scenes remains unclear, but whatever signals were picked up were serious enough to trigger alarm bells for someone who understands industry danger better than most. That someone was 50 Cent. And according to whispers that refused to die down, this is a major reason Lil Meech ended up starring in BMF in the first place. Yes, the show told the story of his father. But it also did something far more strategic. It kept Lil Meech close. Visible. Protected. In an industry where proximity equals safety, 50 Cent did not just offer a role. He created a buffer zone. A shield. A message that said very clearly, this one is under my watch. And this is the part many people still refuse to understand. 50 Cent did not just put money in his own pocket and Lil Meech's pocket. That is the surface level take. What he actually did was position himself as a wall between Lil Meech and people who move quietly but strike decisively. In an environment where power rarely announces itself, protection is subtle but deliberate. Lil Meech was young, inexperienced, and surrounded by figures with carefully polished public images and deeply buried histories. If 50 had not stepped in when he did, there is a very real possibility that Lil Meech would have ended up as just another name people reference vaguely when discussing victims no one wants to acknowledge. When people say 50 Cent saved him, that is not exaggeration. That is context. This was not favoritism. It was not ego. It was recognition. 50 Cent has survived the same industry long enough to recognize danger before it becomes irreversible. He saw patterns. He saw pressure. And instead of waiting for tragedy, he acted. He made it clear that Lil Meech was off limits. And that alone changes how predators operate. They avoid resistance. They hate witnesses with influence. And they do not challenge someone who is willing to burn bridges rather than play silent. Which is exactly why the later fallout felt so personal. This was not mild disappointment. This was betrayal. After the opportunities, the protection, the checks, and the doors that were opened quietly, Lil Meech being seen around people who represented opposition cut deep. Especially when Big Meech re-entered the picture and began publicly associating with Rick Ross, knowing very well that there was long-standing tension there. That move did not feel accidental. It felt careless. And to someone who had been holding the line, it felt like disrespect. That is when restraint collapsed. 50 Cent was not angry in a polished, public relations-approved way. This was raw. Emotional. The kind of anger that comes from feeling like loyalty was taken for granted. That is why things turned public. People criticized him for that, claiming he should have handled it privately. But they misunderstood the psychology. When someone you have protected begins moving in ways that could undo everything, public pressure becomes leverage. Threatening to cancel the show was not about dominance. It was about consequences. About reminding everyone involved that nothing in this industry is permanent. Then the messages surfaced. And those screenshots changed the entire tone of the narrative. Lil Meech did not come across as arrogant or dismissive. He sounded hurt. Confused. Exhausted. He said he would give the shirt off his back for 50 Cent, and that did not read as a slogan. It read like a plea. He could not understand why the energy had shifted so dramatically, why loyalty was suddenly in question, why he was being treated like an enemy instead of family. That kind of confusion does not come from manipulation. It comes from someone who truly does not see how badly things have unraveled. He admitted he was human, and that detail matters more than people realize. Fame strips people of their humanity. It demands perfection, discipline, and silence. But he acknowledged his struggles. His mental pressure. His stress. He insisted he never switched sides. And when he bluntly rejected Rick Ross, it was not for drama. It was an attempt to prove allegiance. Then he mentioned his father. That moment shifted everything. He explained that Rick Ross helped his father financially during a difficult gap. That was not flexing. That was survival. That was a son explaining why boundaries blurred. When family enters the equation, logic bends. Pride dissolves. The pressure was clearly crushing him. He said the internet noise was throwing him off, and that single sentence says more than paragraphs ever could. Fame does not harden everyone. For some, it fractures them. He reminded 50 that their relationship existed in real life, not just online narratives. That was not a defense. That was a plea to be seen beyond headlines and comment sections. And yet, despite all of that vulnerability, the response he received felt cold. Almost dismissive. And that silence, more than any argument, is what made the situation feel truly dangerous. Because when protection turns distant, everyone starts asking the same question quietly. Who is really safe now? What next season, little guy? That line was not humor. It was hierarchy. It was power being reasserted in real time. When 50 Cent said it, he was not joking, and everyone in the room understood that. Bringing up Love and Hip Hop Atlanta was not banter. It was a warning dressed up as entertainment. A reminder that careers in this industry are not earned once and kept forever. They are leased. Renewed at the discretion of whoever holds the leverage. Calling Mona Scott was symbolic, almost surgical. It was a way of shrinking Lil Meech's status instantly, from the lead of a prestige crime drama to just another disposable reality television storyline. In this business, that kind of downgrade is not shade. It is humiliation by design. And the situation did not stop there. Once anger replaces restraint, lines disappear. Accusations about substance use dragged everything into darker territory. That was no longer about contracts or professionalism. That was fear mixed with frustration. Concern tangled with suspicion. Claims like that do not come out of thin air. They usually come from patterns someone believes they have noticed, moments that raised alarms, behaviors that felt off behind closed doors. Whether exaggerated or not, the intensity of the accusation suggested something had been simmering long before it exploded publicly. And when discomfort around personal relationships entered the conversation, it revealed something deeper. Not romantic jealousy, but territorial anxiety. The unease that appears when influence begins to slip and control feels threatened. What makes this entire situation so volatile is that there are no clean heroes. No simple villains. Everyone involved is operating from emotion, history, and pressure. 50 Cent is not wrong for expecting loyalty and discipline from someone he invested in and protected. Lil Meech is not wrong for feeling overwhelmed, pulled in multiple directions, and crushed by expectations that came faster than he could process. The problem is power. Power magnifies everything. When ordinary people argue, it stays small. When powerful people clash, it becomes spectacle. Messages become evidence. Conversations become ammunition. And the internet consumes it like entertainment, forgetting these are real lives colliding in real time. At the center of it all sits a painful truth. Protection does not guarantee obedience. Loyalty does not erase vulnerability. 50 tried to shield Lil Meech from dangers he personally survived, but he could not protect him from pressure, from noise, or from the emotional weight of sudden fame. Lil Meech wanted understanding, but underestimated how quickly trust erodes when money, reputation, and influence are involved. And once power feels disrespected, it rarely responds with patience. Then the narrative shifted again, into something even more uncomfortable. Behind the anger was fear. Real fear. The kind that comes from recognizing patterns you have seen before. Warnings repeated over and over, hoping repetition would somehow prevent collapse. Not control. Not ego. Prevention. Watching someone glamorize chaos like it was survival instead of a warning sign. Watching curiosity replace caution in the faces of people standing too close to the fire. That is how destruction sneaks in quietly. The advice was not moral. It was practical. Slow down. Stop burning money. Stop treating self-destruction like a badge of honor. Because the industry loves to romanticize the fall, never the aftermath. Never the mornings after. Never the phone calls you dread making. Never the cleanup that happens in silence so public images stay intact. What people never see are the decisions made behind closed doors. The weight of sending someone to rehab. The guilt. The fear of acting too late or too soon. Rehab is not dramatic. It is paperwork, silence, and nights filled with doubt. Smiles still get posted. Appearances still get made. And behind all of it, someone is praying another person survives the night. Then came moments that could not be ignored. Observations from people on set who knew the signs immediately. Not rumors. Recognition. The eyes. The timing. The way a body moves slightly out of sync with the room. Vomiting during weapons tests. That is not nerves. That is the body rejecting something it should never have been processing in the first place. Warning signs rarely whisper. They shout. People just choose not to listen. And when stories surfaced about substances sitting casually in a truck, the reality became impossible to laugh off. Things people joke about. Things minimized as harmless. The same way danger always gets softened when wrapped in nostalgia or humor. That is how people get hurt. That is how lives unravel quietly before anyone wants to admit it is happening. This was never just about television, contracts, or ego. It was about power, fear, and a desperate attempt to stop history from repeating itself. What began as protection turned into conflict. What could have stayed private became public because silence was no longer an option. And by the time the dust settled, everyone had lost something. Trust. Peace. Dignity. That is the part no viral clip ever shows. If Lil Meech truly came that close to becoming a victim, then the most disturbing part of this story is not what we know, but what we do not. Because for every name that surfaces publicly, there is an invisible list that never makes headlines. The almost victims. Almost overdosed. Almost crashed. Almost disappeared. Almost got pulled into something they could not escape. Almost never trends, but it should. Almost is the thin line between life continuing and life ending without warning. And when money, influence, and unchecked power enter the equation, that line becomes razor thin, because saying no to the wrong person suddenly feels dangerous. Of course, social media did what it always does. Opinions poured in instantly. Comment sections transformed into courtrooms. Some people claimed patterns, calling it betrayal, calling it intentional.